On a cold, somber morning, February 13th, 1542, the unforgiving stones of the Tower of London bore witness to a chilling scene. A young woman, barely 19 years old, walked slowly, her trembling hands clutching a small prayer book, as guards escorted her down the grim corridor. Her destination, the scaffold, erected on the dreaded Tower Green, a place already stained with royal blood. This was Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of the formidable King Henry VIII, about to face the executioner's axe. The night before, in a display of raw desperation, she had asked for the execution block to be brought to her cell. She spent hours practicing how to position her head, a macabre rehearsal for her impending demise, hoping to meet her end with dignity. How could a young woman, who just 18 months prior had been the Queen of England, adorned in silks and jewels, adored by a powerful king, meet such a brutal end? Her story is a poignant testament to the fragility of fortune, the perils of royal power, and the devastating consequences of youthful indiscretion in an unforgiving age. To truly grasp Catherine Howard's downfall, we must rewind to 1540. King Henry VIII, then 49, was a shadow of his former athletic self. Overweight, plagued by a festering, ulcerated leg that caused him immense pain and emitted a repulsive odor, and deeply embittered by his succession of matrimonial failures, particularly the humiliating annulment of his marriage to Anne of Cleves, his fourth wife. The king seemed an unlikely candidate for another marriage. His legendary vigor had been replaced by a brooding, paranoid disposition. Yet, fate intervened when he met Catherine. She was a lady-in-waiting to his former wife, and the niece of the powerful Duke of Norfolk, a key figure in court politics who saw Catherine as a means to restore his family's influence and perhaps steer the king away from Protestant leanings. Catherine Howard, lacking royal lineage and a formal education, grew up in the chaotic and unsupervised household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Agnes Howard. This environment, particularly the communal maiden's chamber, allowed for youthful indiscretions away from adult scrutiny. At just 13, Catherine had her first romantic encounter with her music teacher, Henry Manox, involving intimate physical contact. 2 years later, she began a more serious relationship with Francis Derham, her grandmother's secretary. They openly behaved as if married, using terms like husband and wife, and meeting secretly in the dormitory. In Tudor times, such a pre-contract with physical intimacy could be considered a legally binding, informal marriage, potentially nullifying any future union. These youthful secrets, stemming from her unsupervised upbringing, remained hidden when her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, introduced her to King Henry VIII's court in the 1540s. Beautiful, vivacious, and exuberant, Catherine immediately captivated the aging king. Henry, desperate for youth, beauty, and the promise of a renewed dynasty, was utterly enchanted by her youthful gaiety and charm. He affectionately called her his rose without a thorn and his jewel of womanhood, viewing her as a symbol of purity and rebirth after his perceived slights from previous wives. The marriage was celebrated with astonishing speed on July 28, 1540, a mere 19 days after the annulment of his marriage to Anne of Cleves. The rapidity of the union speaks volumes about Henry's infatuation and the Howard family's political maneuvering. The king, seemingly rejuvenated by love, threw off his former melancholic demeanor. He showered Catherine with lavish gifts, exquisite jewels, luxurious silks and velvets, and valuable properties. Nothing was too extravagant for his young queen, who, for a brief period, brought a spark of joy back into his increasingly grim existence. Initially, Queen Catherine thrived at court, her charm and vivacity a welcome change. Yet, her marriage to the aging, physically repulsive and volatile Henry VIII was a source of profound unhappiness. This stark contrast between her king and the youthful courtiers fueled a desire for genuine affection. She soon began a clandestine affair with the handsome Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. Lady Jane Rochford, her lady-in-waiting, facilitated these secret meetings, ironically mirroring her role in Anne Boleyn's downfall. Meanwhile, the dormant whispers about Catherine's past began to stir. Francis Derham, her former lover, a man of audacious self-interest, brazenly reappeared at court, not only demanding a position in her royal household, but also openly boasting of his former intimacy with the Queen. Terrified at the prospect of her premarital relationships being exposed, a revelation that would invalidate her marriage to the king and brand her an impostor, Catherine made a fatal error of judgment. Hoping to silence him and perhaps keep him close where she could monitor him, she granted Derham the prestigious position of her secretary. This decision, intended to bury her past, only served to bring the danger alarmingly closer, placing a ticking time bomb within her own staff. In the summer of 1541, while the king and queen were on a lavish royal progress through northern England, designed to showcase the king's health and the stability of his new marriage, the secret meetings between Catherine and Culpeper intensified. Jane Rochford, with cunning precision, arranged for empty rooms in the various stately mansions where the court lodged. This allowed the Queen and her lover to spend hours together, often in the dead of night, while the king, oblivious and infirm, slept. These meetings were incredibly risky, dependent on the discretion of a handful of servants, and each clandestine encounter pushed Catherine closer to the precipice. The inevitable fall arrived with brutal swiftness in November 1541. The catalyst was John Lascelles, a Protestant reformer with direct connections to the Duchess of Norfolk's household. His sister, Mary Hall, had been a servant there and held knowledge of Catherine's past. Troubled by his conscience, Lascelles made the perilous decision to reveal Catherine's history to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a close and trusted advisor to the king and a key figure in the Protestant faction at court. Cranmer, acutely aware of the volatile monarch's temperament and the immense political ramifications of such news, chose a cautious yet undeniably effective approach. Rather than confronting the king directly, he strategically left a detailed letter outlining the accusations on the royal bench in the chapel, knowing Henry would discover it during his daily prayers. When Henry read the letter, his initial reaction was one of profound disbelief and fury. He could not comprehend that his rose without a thorn could be anything but pure. He ordered a discreet investigation, desperately hoping the accusations were false, perhaps a malicious plot by his enemies. However, evidence quickly mounted, becoming undeniably damning. Former servants of the Duchess, including Mary Hall, unequivocally confirmed Catherine's relationship with Manox and Derham, providing specific details and eyewitness accounts. Worse still, the investigation unearthed undeniable proof of her current affair with Culpeper. A damning letter, written in Catherine's own hand to Culpeper, was discovered, ending with the fatal words, "My heart and body are at your disposal, and I wish I were in your arms, for it would be a relief to my heart." This written proof of her infidelity, in her own words, sealed her fate, confirming the betrayal that Henry could no longer deny. Henry, upon discovering the betrayal by the woman he had considered pure and innocent, the woman who had momentarily rekindled his zest for life, was utterly devastated. Witnesses reported that he wept openly before his council, a rare display of vulnerability from the mighty monarch. His grief quickly turned to incandescent rage. He was heard demanding a sword to kill the Queen with his own hands. Then, in a fit of uncontrollable fury and heartbreak, he abruptly left Hampton Court in the middle of the night, refusing to ever see Catherine again. Their marriage, so swift and passionate, was now irrevocably shattered. Catherine, confined to her chambers, initially remained ignorant of the true reason for her sudden fall from grace. When informed of the accusations, particularly the adultery with Culpeper, which she vehemently denied despite admitting her past with Derham, she reportedly descended into a state of panic and despair. She tried to run through the palace corridors, desperately shouting the king's name, pleading for an audience to beg for forgiveness. The guards intercepted her, leading her back to her chambers, which had now become her opulent prison. On November 7th, 1541, Catherine was formally stripped of her title as queen and transferred from Hampton Court to Sion Abbey, a former monastery that served as a temporary place of detention. There, during intense interrogations conducted by members of the King's Council, she confessed to her premarital relationship with Derham, acknowledging a pre-contract. However, she adamantly, even vehemently, denied having committed adultery with Culpeper, perhaps hoping that admitting to a pre-contract would invalidate her marriage to Henry and thus absolve her of treason for adultery. Her desperate denials, however, were insufficient in the face of the mounting evidence and the king's wrath. Don't let your historical curiosity be beheaded like Catherine. Subscribe to our channel and stay updated on all the royal drama without the risk of losing your head. Derham and Culpeper were arrested and subjected to brutal torture. Under duress, Culpeper admitted to desiring carnal knowledge of the Queen and that they had met privately, although he never explicitly confessed to actual consummation. Their confessions, however incomplete, were enough. Both men were executed in December 1541. Culpeper, being of noble birth, was granted the privilege of beheading, a swift and relatively dignified death. Derham, however, suffered the full, gruesome punishment for treason. He was dragged through the streets, hanged until almost dead, then disemboweled, and quartered while still conscious, a horrific public spectacle designed to be a chilling warning. In January 1542, Parliament, a compliant instrument of the king's will, passed an Act of Attainder against Catherine. This legal instrument allowed for condemnation without a formal trial, bypassing due process and rendering the accused guilty by parliamentary decree. The new law declared that it was treason for a queen not to reveal her sexual past to the king before marriage, a retrospective application of law specifically designed to ensnare Catherine. Furthermore, it chillingly stipulated that a queen could commit treason simply by the intention of adultery, even if no physical act occurred, setting a dangerously broad and absolute precedent for all future queens. Catherine, now barely 17 years old, remained detained in the Tower of London for weeks, awaiting the king's final, agonizing decision. Henry, still deeply wounded by her betrayal and likely influenced by his counsel's insistence on an absolute legal precedent, ultimately signed the death warrant. In the days leading up to her execution, confined to her cell in the Tower's gentleman jailer's lodging, Catherine reportedly engaged in her unsettling practice of placing her head on the execution block. This macabre rehearsal was a desperate, pathetic attempt to maintain some control and die with a semblance of dignity, perhaps hoping to emulate her cousin Anne Boleyn's composed demeanor. On February 13th, 1542, the scaffold was prepared in the very same dreaded area on Tower Green where Anne Boleyn had met her end just 6 years earlier. Unlike Anne, who faced her death with dignity and eloquent composure, Catherine Howard was almost completely overcome by terror. Witnesses reported that she had to be practically carried to the scaffold, her legs giving way under the immense weight of her fear. Her final words, uttered haltingly, were poignant and simple, betraying her desperate state. "I'd die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." She then, perhaps out of sheer terror or a final flicker of defiance, asked the executioner to hurry. A single, swift blow of the axe separated her head from her young body. Henry's rose without a thorn, beheaded before reaching 20 years of age, her brief reign ending in a violent public spectacle. Catherine's body was interred without ceremony in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula inside the Tower of London, near the remains of her ill-fated cousin Anne Boleyn. Henry, seeking to erase all memory of her, forbade any official mourning, and all portraits, symbols, and references to Catherine were systematically removed from the royal palaces and records, an attempt to obliterate her from history. What then is Catherine Howard's legacy? She is often relegated to a mere footnote in history, dismissed as the foolish, unfaithful wife who deserved her fate. However, a deeper, more empathetic analysis reveals a far more complex and tragic figure. She was a teenager, thrust into a marriage with a powerful man 33 years her senior, a king who was sick, physically grotesque, emotionally unstable, and notoriously volatile. She was a product of a childhood devoid of proper guidance, lacking emotional maturity and worldly wisdom to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tudor court. She was surrounded by courtiers who saw in her only a means to advance their own ambitions, and by a court that was a viper's nest of intrigue, whispers, and relentless power struggles. Her indiscretions, while undeniably dangerous, can be seen as youthful folly, exacerbated by immense pressure and a desperate search for genuine affection and excitement. The case of Catherine Howard, though tragically ending her life, did have a significant impact on English laws of treason. The new definition, which considered it treason for a queen not to disclose previous relationships and for a queen to intend adultery, set a chilling precedent for all future royal consorts. This absolute and arguably unfair law remained in the statute books for more than a century, a chilling reminder of her fate and the king's absolute power. Henry never fully recovered from this profound betrayal. Although he married a sixth time to Catherine Parr, he became even more bitter, suspicious, and tyrannical in the last years of his reign, his trust irrevocably shattered. Catherine's grave remained unmarked for centuries, until Queen Victoria, in an act of historical remembrance, ordered memorial plaques to be placed to mark the burial sites of royal victims inside the tower. Today, a simple plaque marks the approximate place where her young body was laid to rest, a stark contrast to the grandeur of her brief reign. The story of Catherine Howard is a somber reminder of the precarious fate of women in the hands of powerful men, of the profound danger of youth without proper guidance in a morally ambiguous world, and of the relentless and unforgiving nature of royal power in Tudor England. She entered history as the queen who lost her head for love, but perhaps she might better be remembered as a victim of the politics, the harsh morality, and the unforgiving system of her time, a teenager who, for a brief, dazzling moment, wore a crown, only to tragically end under the executioner's axe. Her story serves as a perennial cautionary tale, echoing through the centuries. If you enjoyed this delve into Tudor history, make sure to subscribe for more fascinating stories from the past.